I've been using for some years now a little prayer app on my phone called PrayerMate, and I found this really useful. And this Lent I decided to download the Tear Fund stream that enables me to follow the devotions. And on the 17th of March, which happened to be a Tuesday when this all began, Ben Doolan wrote a devotion for Tear Fund, and he entitled his devotion Embrace Vulnerability. And he placed it around those well-known verses in 2 Corinthians 12, where Paul writes, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." What struck me about Ben's devotional was not so much his content, although that was helpful, but the title, Embrace Vulnerability. If he'd entitled it Accept Vulnerability, or Put Up with Vulnerability, or even Be Patient in Vulnerability, that probably would have been more understandable. But that word embrace kind of struck me as being very intentional and very proactive. Alongside others, you'll be preparing to think about Palm Sunday and the journey through the Passion Week up to Easter over these coming days. And I've been reflecting on that as well myself. And I'm particularly struck by the verses that Luke records in Luke 9, where he says this, that Jesus turned his face steadfastly towards Jerusalem. Of course, Jesus knew that Jerusalem was going to be the place of vulnerability, the place of suffering, the place of pain, the place of denial, the place of rejection, the place of loneliness, isolation, the place of death. It wasn't going to be a place of victory or glory, not in the sense that people hoped it would. He embraced the vulnerability of the journey to the cross. I wonder what that looks like for us as we think about embracing vulnerability. I think it means that we step into a place of real faith, saying to God, this is not about me, I'm out of control, but I'm trusting you. That in all this, God is supreme. It's also about an act of obedience. I'm reminded that Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane prays that prayer of stepping into the reality of vulnerability, and he says, not my will be done, but yours be done. And there is a sense that when we're in a place of vulnerability, we step into it, recognising it and saying to God, God, we are vulnerable, but not our will be done, but yours be done. And there is also that act of compassion that I think flows out of embracing vulnerability, recognising that from our vulnerable place we are still able to serve because we have a great God who served us in vulnerability. And therefore we have learned that vulnerability is a good place of where we can bring the compassion and love of Jesus Christ into a vulnerable world. So let me encourage you, alongside Ben, to embrace vulnerability, knowing that God is greater, knowing that God is stronger, and knowing that the resurrection is just round the corner.